All right, so I did a one of these on early voting and data stuff on Tim before on my stream. Didn't release it as a video. So for those that are just seeing this on YouTube and just see this one here, you probably wouldn't have seen that previous bashing of Tim Pool's absolute failure to understand or analyze data. We're going to go into another one. So this is from a few days ago, or maybe a little bit more than a few days ago. I think Saturday. So this past Saturday. So some of the numbers and stuff that he presents here have changed since, and we're going to look at them. But let's get right into how he thinks Trump is winning in early voting.
Two key metrics suggesting that Donald Trump may already be winning the 2020 election are voter registration numbers and early voting and absentee ballot numbers. Right now, we're supposed to be seeing Democrats with a slight advantage in voter registration numbers. But the Republicans have been closing the gap in many very important states, suggesting Donald Trump is on track to win Pennsylvania, Florida, and North Carolina. Now, I say on track. We don't know what's going to happen. This video is about what might happen based on early numbers, which will absolutely change. But there's one thing I can't say definitively. Either the predictions were wrong or the polling was wrong. Because in at least one state, early voting data shows Republicans outnumber Democrats. Whoa.
No, not true. We're going to get in there. We're going to get here, and we're going to cover it all here. But yeah. The projections are wrong or all this other stuff based on, and we're going to use early numbers that show the projections are wrong, even though our early numbers are sitting by and looking good for Democrats across the board. Like, we're recording this on, after the debates, almost 50 million early votes, right? We have surpassed, 2016 numbers, or matched or surpassed them right around there. And there's still 12 days of early voting left to go. And, record numbers this year is what we're looking for. Or looking at.
Wait a minute. How could that be? Democrats are the ones who vote early and vote by mail. So they're outnumbering Republican voters in most states and in many swing states. But in Michigan, Republicans outnumber Democrats, suggesting either the polling itself was wrong, suggesting Joe Biden had several points above Trump, a lead above Trump, or the predictions that Democrats would be voting early and by mail are wrong. I don't think that's the case. I think the polls are actually wrong. Now, when we look at a lot of the early voting data, which I'm going to go through and I'm going to show you, it's hard to predict anything. But I think we can say it seems like Trump is on track to win Michigan. There is reason to believe.
No, he isn't. We'll see. I'm probably a little giddy, a little getting ahead of this here, but, stick with me, those watching the YouTube video. He's wrong. He doesn't know how to read. He does not understand what's being put forward in the data. It's laughably bad, unbelievably so.
Trump is on track to lose Pennsylvania, but when you then factor in voter registration data, it's a toss-up. In which case, Trump is doing better than anyone expected him to right now. And even Nate Silver is saying something looks weird with this because we're seeing way more Democrats vote than Democrats who requested absentee ballots when it comes to voting by mail.
No, that's not what was said by Nate Silver either. We'll get to it when he shows it, but no. I know I'm preempting that stuff, but I know a lot of people like to bail on the videos early. Stay with me. It gets a lot worse for Tim.
Suggesting they have a very high velocity of voter turnout right now, making it seem like they have a huge advantage, but that velocity is going to slow down, and Republicans are going to vote in person in droves. Let me just break this down for you. What I'm trying to say is, it seems like on election night, there may not be a large enough Democrat lead in order to say that Trump needs to wait to declare victory. That it's already looking pretty good for Trump in many ways. And then on November 3rd, Trump will get a massive influx of in-person votes, and then no amount of remaining ballots is going to put Joe Biden over the edge.
That's not what Nate Silver said. We'll get to the tweets. That's not what Nate Silver said. I follow him. I read those tweets, and this is why I want to talk. But stick with me. Stick with me. We'll get there.
I don't know for sure. We're a couple weeks out. I'm just saying people are pointing at the data and saying, whoa, this looks bad for Democrats. You better start worrying now. There's one big advantage. With the early voting and absentee voting, both Democrats and Republicans can see their weak points and adjust. And this means if you're a Democrat, you better start getting out that vote in Michigan because you're losing. And if you're a Republican, you better get out that vote in Pennsylvania because, well, you're losing based on early voting metrics, but not registration metrics, which is weird. But either way, y'all better get out, get people to vote before it's too late. Now, I have the story here from Time, which I find very, very fascinating. I'm going to show you before we get into the hard numbers. How a road trip through America's battlegrounds revealed a nation plagued by misinformation. Is that it? Is that the explanation? Why Trump is doing better than you realized? You know, it reminds me of...
This has nothing to do, I've read the article, it has nothing to do with Trump doing better than we realized, right? Trump isn't doing better than what we realized because Tim can't fucking understand data, can't analyze it, can't read it properly, and is a fucking idiot.
That Skinner, Principal Skinner meme where he's like, am I out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong. Maybe if all of these journalists, they're polling, if it keeps getting things wrong, maybe it's you that lives in wacko, magic land of paranoid delusions. But in this story, this writer says that she found what's going on across this country, a ton of people voting for Trump. You can't measure it in polls, perhaps. And that says to me, maybe the polls are just way, way wrong. She goes on to say that most people don't care about the major headlines. I think we might be on track for a Trump victory. And if it is true that Democrats are voting early and Republicans are still winning in Michigan, Trump may be about to win a landslide in a key battleground state. I'm going to show you the experts' opinions, so don't take my word for it. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com.
Nope. No shilling on my...
here into how things are going with early voting. Okay. And that means, like I said, if you're Democrat or Republican, you're going to see those weak points and you better go out and tell people to vote. This information is going to be very, very important to light a fire under people figuratively, to get them active, get them ready. And we are on track, according to many different metrics, to see a historic voter turnout, which is extremely good news for Democrats. But let's read this because there's a lot.
Probably the only thing he said that was right so far in this is leading to early voter turnout. But, and I probably should release that video just so when I say this, it comes back out here and see it so you can see the early one. He said, well, his idea a week ago before this video was it's going to be the same, so the Democrats are fucked, right? And now he just blows that by in that story he did. He just puts out this new story where he's wrong and wrong and wrong again every time. And whatever little piece of data he can grab or anything that might say, oh, Trump's going to win. So all the experts are saying Trump is on his way to win. Democrats should be scared. And it's like, it's not, because you can't read or understand data and you're putting together or tying together completely, what do I want to say, non-interconnected data points, right? To try to meld your narrative.
A lot going on. How a road trip through America's battlegrounds revealed a nation plagued by misinformation. I'll only read a little bit here, and then I want to show you some numbers. Here's what they say. They go on to mention a guy who says, we got a guy trying not to die, and we've got Trump. Of course, the guy trying not to die is Joe Biden. So the writer then contacted this individual following Trump's diagnosis, didn't care. Van Landegem was unfazed. I think it's unfortunate. He said after I called him back on his opinion of the latest updates. But it's something that a vast majority of the population is going to come down with at one point or another. He still isn't considering voting for Biden. I wasn't surprised. How voters are processing Trump's behavior at this fractured moment may be the most important question of the 2020 election. Jumping down. The more people I met, the more I detected something deep and unpredictable lurking beneath the surface. Something that I wasn't sure was reflected in the polling data. Something that maybe couldn't even be measured at all. My phone was filling up with news, wildfires, Trump calling fallen soldiers losers or suckers, the death toll from COVID, news of Trump's admitting to journalist Bob Woodward on tape he intentionally downplayed the virus, purportedly to avoid causing panic. But almost nobody seemed to be talking about these headlines. And when I asked about them, people often didn't believe them or didn't care. I felt caught in the chasm between the election as it was being reported by my colleagues in the press and the election as it was being experienced by the voters. This person didn't say Trump voters felt this way. This writer is saying people feel this way. I see the fake news all day, every day. I try my best to debunk it and tear through this. Maybe this person's lying. I don't know. But I'll tell you what.
No, you don't debunk any fake news, Tim. You're a perpetrator in spreading fake news and misinformation. So let's not pretend to twist words or pretend that you're something you're not, right? You're a Trump sycophant who's trying to get Trump reelected. Let's be honest here, right? You've put your money where your mouth is in other places and stuff among Republicans, reaching max donations to several Republican challengers, especially to, I think it was AOC, Republican challenger, and then I think the Republican challenging Ilhan Omar got 2,800 from Tim as well. And that was before Tim did the whole, I can't help it, but the Democrats have forced me to vote for Trump this time around. It's like, no, you're backing Trump. You're a Trump supporter. This is all a grift for you to make tons of money, right? Like, you get 100 million views a fucking month across all your YouTube channels. It's insane that this is the top, like, political commentator on the internet. Insane.
If the average person across this country doesn't care about the news, then all their smears and all their polls could not do anything to change people's minds. That means people are getting their information elsewhere. And that means the polls are probably wrong. And that means, to me, Donald Trump is on track to win. Now let's talk about this data.
How? That's unrelated, right? Oh, somebody doesn't care, doesn't there, and therefore the polls are wrong. It doesn't show anything, right?
Daily Mail, they say at least 22 million early election ballots have already been cast. And experts predict that 150 million could vote in the biggest turnout since 1908. They say more than 22 million Americans have already cast their ballots in the election, a record-shattering avalanche. It represents 16% of all votes cast in 2016. Election experts predict that a record 150 million votes may be cast and turnout rates could be higher than in any presidential election since 1908. Democrats are outvoting Republicans by a 2-to-1 ratio in the 42 states included. Now, that may sound bad for Trump, Democrats voting 2-to-1. It's actually not. That's entirely predictable. And if we're going off the actual...
No, that would be bad, right? If as long as this isn't a big cannibalization, now that we're up to just under 50 million, it's like, what, the last update I saw was 47.1 million, matching the 2016 early voting marks with 12 days left to go, with a very good chance that we could hit 100 million early voting before election day. Like, the votes have already been cast, so like the debate, since I'm recording this after the debate tonight, even if you thought debates could move anything, and Trump didn't perform well, Biden did really well, Trump was bad, pretty weak, trying to be more of a politician, more of a stand-up politician that his advisors are advising him for. So he looked really bad. Those votes are locked in at right here where the polls are showing Biden's kicking his ass. And so we could see quite the landslide come election day.
Predictions by, say, the 538, other pollsters, that's exactly what we would expect. The real bad news for Republicans, and this is serious bad news, is the massive voter turnout. Look, I don't know how many people have had a fire lighted under them in order to go out and vote for Trump, but I can tell you the left really, really doesn't like the guy. But let's go back to what I mentioned from Time Magazine as to why I highlighted that story. If this person is traveling across the country and no one cares about the mainstream news' headlines, then it would seem that maybe the massive voter turnout is actually for Trump. Now, that would be interesting. Here's what I'm saying. Even though right now Democrats are out.
I mean, how do you get that, right? Like, they're predicting the massive voter turnout largely because of the expanded mail-in voting, right? Because when you have mail-in voting, more people vote, right? So you get really, really high turnout rates. This is something like a divine disbelief talked about living in Oregon, how they're one of the top voter turnouts in the nation because they do automatic mail-in voting and stuff like that. There's no data that, and the data shows Democrats, where you have party registration, you can see who requested and who returned those ballots. You can see 2-to-1 ratio. That's kicking Trump's ass. Now, that's what the polls suggested from mail-in voting, early voting stuff. Um, so it's no surprise there. But it depends come election day how many Trump supporters turn out, right? But even then, I don't think if we hit 150 million, that's what do we have? We had about 130 million. That's 20 million more votes than in 2016, roughly speaking. If we hit this marker or surpass that, I don't see any possible way Trump can win this election.
Outvoting Republicans 2-1. They're expecting a massive voter turnout later on down the road. That could suggest that all of this fake news is not making people hate Trump. In fact, it may backfire. People like me, maybe, I'm sick and tired of it. But I've got some data I want to show you, notably from Nate Silver, who explains the bad news with Democrats' 2-1 ratio.
No, this isn't bad news. This is Tim can't fucking read, cannot understand what Nate's saying.
It's a little complicated to break down, but bear with me. This is really important stuff. And then I want to show you Trump's winning in Michigan already. Nate Silver says, so far, returned mail ballots are D plus 31. Not a surprise given what polls show. Whereas the set of mail ballots that have been requested but not yet returned are only D plus 17. Why does this matter? If, as the data shows, Democrats are returning their ballots sooner than mail ballots cast closer to Election Day, which in many states will also be counted later, may not be as Democrat as mail ballots overall. They could even wind up being right-leaning conceivably. Let me stop right there and break this down simply. That means there's something called the Red Mirage. On November 3rd, they say Trump will win in a landslide, but then ballots will come in for Joe Biden, swinging the election in Biden's favor. Based on this from Nate Silver, what they're actually saying, what he's showing, is that ballots counted on or after Election Day might actually be right-leaning. That means if on election night Trump wins, he might be able to actually...
So he's not saying they might be right-leaning. They may not be as D as mail-in ballots overall. And in a possible scenario, they could be right-leaning, which he follows up here explaining with that possible scenario. So there's a couple tweets down. And Tim, because he can't keep a thought going and pieces there he's got to break down individually and can't see ahead, is going to ignore the shit said here, piece together a narrative here for that bit, go forward, and then piece together a new narrative when it comes to the new information. So the only way it's in, so also keep in mind in that world, also keep in that in the world in which the race is close enough for this to matter, is probably a world in which Trump has made a fairly big comeback to close the race to say Biden +5. The race isn't tightening. The race hasn't been tightening since he posted this, right? Like, at all. Biden's still sitting right around +10, +9, +10 in the polling average, right? Which means this whole narrative Tim's going to give us here doesn't matter, and it's not Nate Silver sounding the alarm that, oh no, the Dems are in trouble like Tim wants to think.
Declare victory because the ballots expected to come in are the remaining Republican ballots. To put it simply, what we are seeing right now is Democrats firing off all of their ammo at once in a big burst. Now, it doesn't really matter, in my opinion. It just matters for the prediction models. The number of votes will be the number of votes. If 75 million vote Biden and 72 vote Trump, well, then Biden's going to win the national popular vote. We'll see how the Electoral College plays out. But this will change the game as it pertains to the Red Mirage. This data now suggests we should not expect a massive influx of Democratic votes after election night. So election night becomes increasingly more important, and we may actually know the results on election night.
So when you send the ballots in to when they're counted, it depends on the state. There are some states, I think Texas is one of them, you can't count the ballots until the day of the election, right? So no matter when they come in, they're going to be sitting there waiting to be counted on election day, right? So it all depends on that. And that's something else Nate talks about when this does. It's right down here, this final tweet that I don't think he's going to talk about.
Nate says, this means there might not be as much of a blue shift in states with late counted mail ballots, especially ballots that arrive after election day in states that allow that, as people might assume. I'm assuming that that in the world in which this race is close enough for this to matter is probably a world in which Trump has made a fairly big comeback. To close the race to, say, Biden +5, if there's late movement toward Trump, late received mail ballots might not be so blue at all. Anyway, when it comes to vote counting and the timing of when states are called or what the results look like on a given point on November 3rd, 4th, etc., people are actually oversimplifying when they talk about mail votes, Democrat versus in-person votes, Republican. There are 5 tranches. He says, 1, early arriving mail votes are very Democrat. Late arriving mail votes, probably somewhat Democrat, hard to say. Early in-person votes are Democrat. In-person election day votes, very Republican. Provisional ballots, traditionally Democrat, but hard to say this year. In certain states, some of these distinctions may collapse if early in-person votes are counted simultaneously with election day in-person votes. But overall, there are a lot of moving parts, and which tranches are counted at which time will differ from state to state. I have to show you that because the next...
So, this is Tim not understanding what's being said here. Right, so people think, well, mail-in voting is going to go largely Democrat because that's what the polls say, where in-person voting is going to go largely Republican. And depending on how many ballots you get, the whole Red Mirage thing is that, well, they'll vote largely there on election day, and because of how mail-in voting works, some places will count votes as long as your ballot is postmarked day of the election, and received up to like a week later. And so a lot of the narrative is, well, Democrats are largely going to go vote by mail. Republicans are going to vote in person. So the Red Mirage is that, the Republicans that are voting in person, it's going to look pretty red on election night. But as the mail-in voting count, it becomes Democrat. And it's saying, well, there's about like 5 different things in play. Like when you break it down and get a little more complicated into scenarios that could happen and could play out. And it's just like, well, here's a couple of little scenarios where all that stuff works, but then depending on the state, on how they count ballots and stuff like that. So if they're Texas and they won't count any of their mail-in ballots, early mail-in ballots until election night, it doesn't matter when the ballots come in, right? All those ballots are going to sit there in one big chunk. And it all depends on when they're going to report stuff, when stuff gets reported, what gets through, how the counting goes, and all that other stuff. And so different data points could be reported at different times, state to state. And so the overall Red Mirage thing isn't something that you have to actually worry about. It's not saying, oh no, the Republicans are going to win, and there's a very good chance and all this other stuff here. It's just like, no, these are the scenarios and how this stuff works, and the how that mixes with state to state, and how they handle these votes when they count them, when they report them. And it might just be such a mix of things that they collapse in different ways that, the whole Red Mirage thing is, an oversimplification of what might happen election day. Right? And that's all Nate's saying. But Tim's going to take this and, oh no, Republicans are winning.
Bit of data is going to be a bit crazy. I'm showing you this Target early from Target Smart. My understanding is that Target Smart is fairly Democrat. I'm not entirely sure who funds them or what their goal is. We're going to do this. We're going to go to state, and we are going to go to Michigan, one of the most important states in this election. Now, this is what is sending shockwaves among progressives and Democrats. If, as Nate...
What shockwaves? The only person talking about this is Tim Pool.
Silver is saying, returned ballots are D plus 31 on average. Well, then we should see Democrats winning across the board. And if in-person voting will favor Republicans and late counted mail votes will be somewhat Democrat, I show you this data. They show us the past 3 elections, 2016, 18, and 2020. We can see that the midterm elections aren't as favored by most people. But check this out. Right now, Democrats for 2020, 38.1%. Republicans, 40.4%. Wait. This is crazy. They say in Michigan, voters have cast 27.5% of the total votes counted statewide in the 2016 general election. Republicans are beating Democrats in early and absentee voting. That's not supposed to happen. In almost every single state, Democrats lead because, as Nate Silver said, early voting and early mail-in voting is heavily Democrat. early mail-in voting is D plus 31, meaning 31. That's a 2-to-1. Remember the data I showed you in the beginning? 2-to-1 votes, Democrat to Republican, yet in a key swing state. It's not true. If everything I said plays out, and I'm not one of these...
So let's break down what Tim gets wrong here. So see this demographic on TargetSmart. So I have it pulled up here. We'll switch over to that screen in a second. You have this modeled party. What the hell is modeled party? All right, so let's go down here. Right, and this is Tim not reading. Modeled party represents a partisanship prediction derived from the internal TargetSmart modeling. Partisanship... I'm tripping over my words here. Partisanship predictions are not intended to predict specific vote casts or election outcomes. Right? So this is just their partisanship model. And they have this because Michigan doesn't collect like the registered voter data on who requests and who does that. So they don't have that. So they got to model what's going on. Now this was taken October 16th, so about 5 days ago when he did this. I've looked at the data on 2018 when I first saw this, and then obviously today when we decided to do the video. Look there. But so here's the TargetSmart thing to pull up. So national, view type, battleground. Oh, that's not what I want. State. There we go. So let's go to Michigan. Getting it right. So today it's 43-1 to 37-9, right? In their expectations, right? And I'm trying to figure out where he grabbed it from for their modeled party. Because their graph here has shown that the Dems have already outvoted. So I don't know if he just stumbled across this here when there was an error in there that has since been corrected in their model. Or what? But it looks like the Dems are up. The GOP is voting early and stuff here. The Dems are up here, but that's modeled party. And the important thing, registered party, unaffiliated. 100% because Michigan doesn't collect that data. So if we take, I think he talked about North Carolina. Where are we? North Carolina. There we go. We can see actually how registered voted has done, right? By registered party, because they have it. And there's difference by modeled party. Pretty significant when they have the registered data. So I don't know why they'd have both of these here. And so, and just by looking at that for one state, I bet if we dug through more, the model party doesn't seem to be as direct on. So he's using model party stuff that might have changed, but doesn't seem consistent to what their graphs show. So I don't know if he just managed to catch it on a day where it was updated incorrectly or stuff, but he's treating this modeled party stuff here that's just not a thing, right? And this is how clueless Tim is, can't read any of the data.
These expert forecasters, I'm just reading the same as you. Then I could say, based on this, either the polls are wrong or the predictions were wrong. I kind of think the polls were wrong. Take a look at this from 538. This is their aggregate polling for Michigan. Presidential general election yesterday, Biden 54% to Trump's 43%. Biden plus 11. We have SurveyMonkey with Biden up 8. Another from SurveyMonkey, Biden up 8. Trafalgar Group has Trump up 1. Now that might be right. And Harris X, I'm sorry, that's not that's Senate race. On October 15th, Biden was leading across the board. SurveyMonkey, RMG Research, Civics, and Epic MRA all have Biden way, way up. How could that be?
And the two polls that are solid pollsters, or at least better than Trafalgar. Trafalgar Group is a heavy right-leaning one that has a shy Trump voter thing in their methodology that they're counting on. So this Trump plus one is that, hey, there's a big in their methodologies, there's a big shy Trump voter, even though the data doesn't really support that being a thing.
If it's true that Democrats vote early, that means Michigan might be a landslide state for Donald Trump.
No,
now,
it doesn't.
I'll tell you about these other states, because I'll tell you this. If we go to TargetSmart and we look...
So, how does this do it? How does it happen? Well, if you remember his data before he switches it here, TargetSmart has about 21% of the ballots cast back as unaffiliated, right? Based on their modeled party. So what would just largely happen if that breaks, say, 2-1 for Democrats? We assume all the Democrats here in this data here that's just, like I said, has to be off a little bit because it doesn't reflect in their model party graphs down below to this day. So he must have just caught it as a day that was updated wrong, and they recognized an error and it got changed in their model. But even so, if that's right, if it goes 2-1, that's what? That's split in half. That's 10.5 there. 2-1. Well, 7, so 14 to 7. So you got 52 to 47, right? If that's the split, right? That explains it in the polling. Is that there just happens to be more unaffiliated people in Michigan than there is in other states, right? Very, very simple thing that you could account for with the current polls. But Tim's going to run, Republicans are winning, Trump's landslide, because he can't read and understand data.
Look at Pennsylvania is where things get scarier for Republicans because it is massive. Democrats in early voting in Pennsylvania are D plus 50. 50. Now that is massive and really good news for Democrats. Let me show you something over here. 538 says Biden is favored to win. Trump wins 12 out of 100. 12% chance to win, they're saying. But take a look at this. There's only one scenario where 538 says Trump can win without Pennsylvania. And he needs a bunch of other states. This is why I don't think it's actually that bad relative to Trump winning Michigan. Now, in one scenario, Trump doesn't need Michigan, but he does need Pennsylvania. It looks like right now, Trump might be in early voting data, very, very early. I have no idea what's going to happen. He's doing well in Michigan. And keep in mind, these are Republicans returning votes, not necessarily guaranteed votes for Trump. It's just how we're trying to predict things. So if Trump doesn't win Pennsylvania, but does win Michigan, he can still win. And I'll tell you why it's actually better for Republicans, all of this data. Carl Quintanilla is a CNBC, NBC News, Wall Street Journal alumni, and he tweets, JP Morgan's Mark O. Kolanovich says changes in voter party affiliation is a significant variable in predicting the voting outcomes in certain states. What is the current change in voter registration over the past 4 years in swing states? The implication is Trump will win Pennsylvania, Florida, and North Carolina. Now, look, we're mixing metrics here. I can't tell you definitively what will happen. I can just...
Yeah, and some of this is here. If you look into, I've done into like this voter registration thing that people try to put up as Republicans doing well. What largely is happening is that it's voter rolls are being cleared, right? Is leading to a lot of the changes. So it's not actually Republicans out registering new voters compared to Democrats. It's just there's more voter roll as the voter rolls are being purged. There's more Democrats being purged off than Republicans, right? So it's not as big of a thing there as we look through this actual data, as I actually dig deeper into this report, because it's the one thing that I see a lot of Trumpsters like Tim and everybody else online running around and saying, "Oh, voter registration, narrowing the gap," and you go read through articles that look at the data and stuff, and there's like, yeah, it's not really that the Republicans are significantly out registering more people than Democrats. It's just voter rolls being cleared, being a large part of the difference, right?
Tell you that Michigan's results sent shockwaves through many people on Twitter when they were like, whoa, what's happening? Democrats can't be doing this bad in a key swing state now.
There was no shockwaves. Nobody saw this, Tim. I don't know. You must follow, what largely is and what the shockwaves is. Tim follows a lot of Trumpster accounts that posts all this pro-Trump stuff and say, "Oh, look at this data. That means Trump's winning." And he must have seen this the shot from Target Smart said, "Target Smart saying Trump's up and Trump's winning. Trump's gonna win Michigan and all this other stuff." And Tim made a video on it. I mean, that's how fucking stupid Tim is.
Trump is doing that well in Michigan. It makes sense. Trump brought back the auto industry. I can't tell you, man.
That's a lie. The auto industry has actually declined. Even in 2019, it was losing thousands and thousands of jobs. And there's all but one brand new factory that's opening. in Detroit. So they're net negatives. Now he's going to talk about the Ford project. I go here, but a lot of these things with these new jobs coming back, all these projects and stuff like there, they don't actually come back, right? So, and what you'll find a lot with these companies is they'll hire just enough to maintain the subsidies and the benefits that they get from the expansion that they're supposed to be doing in the state. They take that money and then they run with it, right? They have no intention of actually doing anything there, and they just get a bunch of money for essentially free from states, and they get fucked over, right? So anytime this is, oh, they signed this brand new deal, more jobs, it's like, no, doesn't always work that way. Largely doesn't work that way. And you're just giving away subsidies and money to these corporations for nothing.
How many people in Michigan probably cry at night when they realize all of those good things from Michigan, a once booming industry, Rust Belt state, were gone? And Trump lived up to his promise. I remember...
He didn't. They were a net negative in 2019 before the pandemic, and then the pandemic has just made it worse.
That statement put out by Michael Moore. Donald Trump said to those auto execs, I will slap a tariff on your car 20, 30%, and no one will ever buy from you again. And they basically said, try us. And Trump did it. He did it. That vote was the biggest FU, and those factories came back. The people of Michigan...
They didn't come back. Tariffs don't work like that. But being an idiot. But spreading misinformation.
Michigan know this. They also know what it's like being under Gretchen Whitmer. This key swing state, now firmly in Trump's pocket. So we predict. We'll see.
You're going to be laughably... I can't wait until Trump gets curb stomped in Michigan come the election, and Tim's going to have to eat it. But he won't, right? Because he was saying right up to the night before the election that AOC was going to lose her primary devastatingly. And we're so fucking wrong. Because AOC won it by 40 points or something like that. Something ridiculous. Right? She dominated. But, I mean, Tim's an idiot, and he's selling pretty little lies to his conservative fan base.
Trump might actually come out in bad shape in many of these states. Like I mentioned, Pennsylvania, not looking too good for Trump. Check this out. Early voter turnout in Pennsylvania is 30 points higher than it was in 2018 and in 2016. Now, that's crazy. And here's what's significant. Republican voter data is half. It's actually more than half. It's 26 points less than 2018 and 2016. Republicans in Pennsylvania, where are you at? Now, I'm going to stop right there and say, listen, I still think it's just bad news for Democrats, because here's why. Donald Trump told Republicans, vote in person. Vote in person. Now, that doesn't explain why the early voters aren't coming out. It does explain why maybe absentee and mail-in votes aren't turning out. Maybe that come election day, the Republicans in Pennsylvania, terrified they're going to lose their vote by voting any other way, show up in person, where Nate Silver says it will be very Republican. Well, I don't know for sure. I can't speculate all too much. I can just say right now, Republicans, you better be panicked over this data. Democrats leading significantly, percentage-wise. But like I said, registration data suggests Trump wins PA, Florida, and North Carolina. Many people have stated that voter registration better predicts what's going to happen. And let me show you something. In Florida, the Florida Republicans close registration gap with Democrats to historically narrow margin. That's big news. I think Trump's going to win Florida.
Again, I dug into this stuff. The registered voting stuff isn't adding a whole bunch of new ones. It's clearing voter rolls and stuff here of people that aren't active. Is largely making up the difference in the margin, right? It's not a massive turnout.
Keeping in mind, when I go back to these predictions by 538, Trump needs Florida in every winnable scenario. So what does that necessarily mean? If Trump wins Florida, and I think it's likely, especially considering you got a lot of people in Florida who do not like socialism, that's probably in the bag. We'll see how everything else plays out. Now, I went through all the other states, and they all track very predictably. Democrats are up in early voting and absentee by reasonable numbers. That makes it hard to actually predict anything. But I would say, based on the Michigan numbers, Trump's at least got that one in the bag. And I'll tell you what, man,
No, he doesn't, right?
across
Because
the board,
literally a week, and remember, this is model party voting, right? Where's Michigan? It's not there. And what's weird is their 2018 model party voting has gone up since what it showed on his thing. So I have no idea how fucking reliable this internal modeling works for him. Right? This seems like pretty much complete guesswork if your past election data is changing. Right? It's being modeled differently based on whatever you plug in there when you should know the voting and stuff because they already happened. But yeah, it's not.
Republicans have been doing way better in closing the gap. Check this out. Axios reported this on August 4th. The voter registration gap between Democrats and Republicans has
Here it is, right
narrowed
here.
in some of these key states.
Switching parties are dropping out of the electorate. Not necessarily a surge in new voters registering for Republicans are indicating new Trump voters. According to Dave Wasserman of the Cook Political Report, it's right in this fucking thing where he's been trying to push this as well. Democrats are still registering more new voters than Republicans in many key states. Right? So his narrative, like right on the fucking screen in front of him, is wrong. The narrative he's been pushing this whole time up to this has been wrong. Because the dude cannot read and cannot understand any of the data.
According to Trump Victory and Axios review of those states' records. But it has a lot to do with voters switching parties or dropping out of the electorate. Not necessarily a huge surge of new voters registering as Republicans, nor indicating new Trump voters, according to Dave Wasserman of the Cook Political Report. I want to highlight something over with the PA numbers. Unaffiliated voters are really, really low as well. So Trump and Republicans are not getting new voters. And if across the board Trump is registering more people, I believe we are going to see way more Republican votes than normal on election day with in-person voting.
I mean, he just changed his narrative right in here. Like, this is crazy. His narrative he's been pushing this whole time has been wrong. And then mid-making the video, he changes his narrative. What the hell?
Why the number, in my opinion, is probably so low right now, because it doesn't make sense. Trump's probably going to get the same amount of votes he's going to get. I can't imagine a scenario where, I got to be honest, where Trump loses.
And two, these are votes sent back. So these are modeled unaffiliated ones, right, that are sending it back. That's the percentage of the total number of ballots put back that based on this modeled party in PA. Now, PA does give registered parties, so we know who's registered and who's actually not. So I don't know why he wouldn't show that. It's very similar from last I looked. Registered party. Yeah, 71%, even less for the Republicans, right? Because now they have some other smaller parties that people are registered in. As part of it here. 7.2% on unaffiliated that aren't registered as a specific party. So these are votes all cast, by the way. These are votes all sent back. Who they're going for, who they're not there, right? So it's not like, oh, well, we can dig into this unaffiliated one. It's like, Tim, that's not what the data's showing you there.
This is Pennsylvania. You know why?
It just bugs me that he can't read the data at all.
Because Joe Biden has said over and over and over again, and so has Kamala Harris, they would ban fracking. They would ban it. It's obsolete. They would phase it out. And then Joe Biden tries saying, now, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that.
So no, they don't say they're going to ban fracking across the board. It's all new federal or on federal lands. No new fracking on federal lands, right? That's the only ban they have. Two, and that's been consistent, right? Now Biden in the debates flubbed that and said he'd ban fracking, but that's not his actual position. It wasn't his position on his policy platform at the time. It was just Biden flubbed what he was saying. You know.
But these people don't care about the headlines. That's why I showed you the story from Time Magazine. If people across this country do not care for the headlines, Joe Biden can say whatever he wants. We've seen the videos on Twitter. We've seen the videos on Twitter. It doesn't mean anything. Trump getting these big gains.
So based on what you were saying about there, then the headlines that Trump wants to ban fracking aren't things that would track either, right? So this is the idiocy of how he builds and molds a narrative.
In voter registration and in a key swing state, I'm thinking we're seeing really good news for Trump. Now, look, to be fair, anyone can take this data and give their opinion and analysis and frame it as positive for Joe Biden. So keep that in mind. That's why I wanted to show you PA is looking good for Democrats. I don't know what it means. It means Democrats might actually win. That flies in the face of what I know about the Pennsylvania voters, about Philadelphia. So I don't really believe it.
I mean, you don't know jack shit about anything, Tim. Right? You've proven that time and time again. Or if you do know shit, you're just willing to lie about it and make it look like you don't actually know shit.
Especially with what's going on with Sean Parnell up in Pittsburgh. I feel like Pennsylvania's going Trump. But that data is significant, so you better get out and get that vote. Let me tell you what's going on with Joe Biden, however. Wall Street donors line up behind Biden in massive third quarter fundraising haul. Two main points here. Joe Biden is the establishment candidate. He's the candidate of the war machine. He's the candidate of big corporations. He is the candidate of Wall Street. So how are we seeing the Occupy Wall Street type leftists backing this guy? Not every single Occupy Wall Street activist, came out in favor of the left. Some went to Trump. Some went right because of the populist message, ending the free trade agreements and helping the American worker.
Trump hasn't ended any of the free trade agreements, right? So if you think he's doing that, that's not going to happen. But A, free trade is not a bad thing, right? Economically speaking.
But look at Bernie Sanders getting behind Joe Biden, the candidate of Wall Street. That's weird, isn't it? Bernie Sanders says the billionaires trying to swing our elections. Bro, the billionaires are propping up your buddy Biden. That to me says a lot about what's going on. The establishment has lost control of the narrative. Time magazine says it across this country. People just don't care. They don't want to hear it. They're losing control and trying to censor new information that makes Biden look bad. Joe Biden and the Democrats have already been panicking over information being released, and now confirmation from multiple sources. The laptop is real. The emails are real. Joe Biden, it would seem, was using his son as an intermediary to make money off his position. The establishment.
No, it wasn't, right? You got 22 years of tax data. It's not there. Or tax returns. It's not there. So you're just wrong. This whole story is dumb. So if he's going to go off on that the last little bit, call it for the video. That's it. Have it in here. Like, subscribe, comment down below. See you in the next one.